Every time I come up to making any kind of big life decision, I see it as a crossroads. There are 3 or 4 different ways to go here. Which is the one which is, I don't know, maybe the most spiritual, the most honest, and the most beneficial to everybody?
Standing at the crossroads, trying to read the signs, to tell me which way I should go to find the answer. And all the time
smoking my cigar. The only time I'm happy is when I play my guitar.
Eric Clapton is, by common consent, the greatest living exponent of the electric guitar. He could be the archetypal guitar hero, but a hero that hardly anyone could say that they really know. He shuns fame, a bluesman who has lived the blues. And he has an almost chameleon-like ability to change, survive, and move on. This was never more apparent than at the height of his fame in the 60s when he was part of the supergroup Cream. It's 1968 and Cream's farewell concert at the Albert Hall. Clapton is about to pull the plug on the world's most successful rock trio. With an almost dismissive wave of the hand, Cream were finished. And with one gesture, Eric was creating another chapter in the story of a musical legend. Throughout both his personal life and professional career, the crossroads have been used as a metaphor for Eric's ever-changing life. The addiction center in Antigua in the Caribbean that he founded is named after it. It refers to a classic track that Eric has often revisited. It was written by blues legend Robert Johnson, a man whose vision and dedication acted as a beacon for the young Eric.
When I got to Robert Johnson, it was almost like he closed the door, and it was almost another kind of experience in that I knew that was somewhere I could never go. I could always aspire to that, but it was something I would never grasp. And I think that, in a way, he was like the light at the end of the tunnel in a way that that gave me like a horizon to go towards. Whereas I could probably, in a conceited way, say, oh, well, I've got this piece of Brunsey down, you know, or I could play Peggy Sue or Maybe Baby in a way that sounded like Buddy Holly. But you could never say that of any of Robert Johnson's pieces.
But you treat me so unkind.
Robert Johnson started out as a rather average folk blues player in the Deep South during the 1930s. However, one year he disappeared for 6 months. On his return, he was arguably the greatest guitar player on the Mississippi Delta. The legend soon spread that he had sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads in return for his superhuman talents.
But you treat me so unkind.
I don't know anyone yet that has managed to actually totally imitate anything he's ever done. It's beyond. So to me, he was like the thing to aspire to, and at the same time know that I could never get there.
Robert Johnson's body was buried here in an unmarked grave at the crossroads in Mississippi. It was this story, more than any other, that seized the imagination of the young Eric Clapton. But Eric's background was a million miles away from the Deep South and the cotton fields. He was born and brought up in what is known as London's Stockbroker Belt, a chain of prosperous country villages on the outskirts of England's capital. He was born in a small village called Ripley in Surrey.
I couldn't have chosen a better place to have come from. If I had to, if I had to kind of choose where I was going to be born all over again, I don't think I would have opted for the Mississippi,
Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, although born on the other side of London, had an almost identical experience as a youngster in the suburbs.
I guess it was the music from America originally that suddenly the world seemed to me to go from black and white to technicolor, full technicolor, you know, and suddenly there was something happening. The rest of it had seemed to be while I was a kid, and I've no doubt to Eric, a kind of scraping along, you know, and like just trying to like gather up the bits, you know, it seemed to, because your parents and, or in Eric's case, his grandparents or whatever, you know what I mean? We grew up in a sort of fractured post-war England, you know, which is damn boring.
We grew up together from babies, really. He's only 5 doors away. Rose and Jack brought Rick up, his grandparents. And they were ever loving to him, and they spoiled him a little bit, as they would. He also seemed to have the newest toys, etc. Everything they did for him.
Eric's childhood was the childhood of an outsider. In England in 1945, there was still a stigma attached to being born illegitimate.
The thing about being outsider was never put on me by them. It was something that I felt within myself as, in a genetic way, is that perhaps, and I've since learned that my father was a traveller. Not a Romany or a gypsy, but he always was on the move. And I think I inherited that genetically, is that, you know, and I know today that I still like to divide my time between one place. I like to spend a certain amount of my time here. Then after a while, I want to move. I just have an inbuilt desire to travel, which those guys don't have. They like they like staying there.
Well, I'm a motherless child.
Eric was the result of his mother's liaison with a Canadian Air Forceman. His grandparents brought him up as their own, and he thought his real mother was his sister until he was 11. His best friend from that time, Guy Pullin, remembers Eric's reaction to finding out the truth about his origins.
It was shock more than anything else, I think, when he realised that Rose wasn't his actual mother, because obviously Rose could have been his mother with the age gap. Pat had him when she was only 16, so we would just think that it was her mother anyway. She wasn't any older than her own parents.
Eric was seen as an outsider by his contemporaries.
I think whatever he did, he tended to, you know, do it in a quite a serious way. I remember he went to see the film The Magnificent Seven and was very impressed by it. One of the 7 was a knife thrower, and he had a knife and sort of suddenly went like that, and the person was dead. And that impressed Eric, and he wanted to be the one who threw the knives.
Turning from his immediate surroundings, Eric looked across the Atlantic to a more glamorous world, one that he would later conquer, and one that now provided him with inspiration to turn to music.
One of the first books I ever got my hands on, it was a prize at school, you know, for a prize giving day. They gave me a book on America, and it was like it was like a whole other world, you know, photographs of skyscrapers, and I had an early interest in American cars and military stuff and cowboys and Indians, and it was all outside. Everything was outside of Ripley, all the stuff I was interested in. And of course, eventually music, when that, you know, became a big part of my life. My earliest recollections of music were of music from far away. I couldn't, you know, the stuff that was local, it didn't intrigue me that much. It looked pretty much like imitative, you know.
Eric became driven to master the music he heard from the States, from the likes of bluesman Big Bill Broonzy.
I'd say that the formative influences were probably Buddy Holly and Big Bill Broonzy, between, you know, the white and black. It's like a yin and yang side of individual musicology. And these were both solo artists who had completely mastered their scope of the music, from a white side and from a black side, and was actually probably the root may have been Robert Johnson for both of them in terms of its purity, if not Robert Johnson, Leroy Carr, or I don't know who Buddy Holly would have listened to, but it's absolutely guaranteed that it would have been black music. I'm pretty sure it would have been actually more like maybe a mixture of, you know, country and blues, perhaps someone like Bob Wills, or because they were Texans, and the music from the South. So they were, I mean, those were my early role models, and they were actually fairly accessible artists, you know, like there were times when Bill Brunsey would actually make almost white music because he had begun to tour, I guess, and was playing in Europe and had learned how to compromise a little bit without really watering it down. So he was quite accessible to me in terms of learning, and Buddy Holly was very accessible because of the way he played and wrote. And they were really my formative role models.
He would have been about 10 or 11, I suppose, and Rose bought him a Spanish guitar. Nothing too expensive, obviously, that was his first guitar. And it was quite incredible to watch him, because he used to sit on the village green here in the summer and he had this old Grundy tape recorder, and he continually played Brunsey. We didn't know Brunsey, all the local boys. I mean, we were all into Buddy Holly and Elvis. We'd never heard of Brunsey, Robert Johnson, these guys that we know so well now. But he used to literally play Brunsey, back, forward, and then copy the riff. And copy the riff, and copy the riff, copy the riff. And he used to say, how does this sound? And it used to sound the same. It is self-taught, magnificent, you know.
But I'm going to the river, get me a tangled rocking chair.
Ripley was very much an athletic community, and I needed to be. I needed to meet other people who were perhaps more creative or more oddball. I couldn't fit into it. It was a very humiliating experience, and I found that the only thing I had to offer was my ability to play the guitar, and I became accepted for that, and I developed in time a reputation which led to all of the work that I eventually got.
When he was 16, Eric won a place among Surrey's elite students at the Kingston Art School. It meant travelling to a bigger town and a partial escape from Ripley.
We had this one thing that tied us all together, which was this love of, or the passion of black music by way of the blues, which we discovered. This was like an endless journey of which we were just starting on. Hollyfield Road in Surbiton was the main school. We had an annex which was 3/4 of a mile up the road. Well, to get to that, you had to go past Bell's Music Shop. And the big momentous thing was that Eric's grandmother had bought him this electric guitar, this K guitar, which was, I think, a Barney Kessel model. And it really was a stunning thing and terribly expensive at that time. If I remember rightly, it was somewhere in the region of £90-ish, that sort of price. Well, if you think that I think my father was earning about £8 a week, that was a lot of money.
Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself.
It was like almost like a Hollywood kind of thing going on in Kingston. For someone who came from Ripley, it was like stepping into superstardom. And I remember there was this pub called The Crown where everyone would go and drink, and it had its own hierarchy, its own pecking order. There were for someone like me, I had to kind of hang around the fringe until I was kind of okay.
At that time, though, I suppose we thought we were refined. We were kind of into Muddy Waters records and things, and not so much bothering with the pop end of things, and that side of the showbizy side of, and of course you were resolutely non-showbiz.
I think I knew that with the Kingston crowd. I think instinctively I knew I'd found something which could give me a standing, a platform, or a place to be. It would give me. It was a way of earning respect. It was the first. It was the first sign I'd had of anything that was in my being that could garner some respect, even if it was momentarily. But I could stop people and get their attention and admiration. And that's when I knew that was something I could employ for the rest of my life, as long as I developed it.
He used to come over to Kingston on the 215 bus, and again, because we didn't have any money, couldn't go out spending all over the place, he would come to my place, and we'd sit and listen with our ears to the floor, listening to a dance set record player. one record was Big Bill Bruns's When Did You Leave Heaven?
Eric's devotion to the blues has never gone away, but this dedication to his roots was sorely tested when commercial success came his way. He didn't have long to wait. Eric Clapton's move from the Surrey dormitory town of Ripley to the relative bright lights of Kingston gave him an opportunity to show his skills to fellow students at the Kingston Art School. In the explosion of new music, which took place in 1963, a new band was being formed by some fellow students. They asked Clapton to audition when a vacancy in the Yardbirds materialized.
He seemed very cocksure of himself, very confident, quite a strong person, and he played with us. And I sort of immediately took an immediate dislike to him for some reason. I thought, well, this guy's a bit cocky.
There was nothing else like it, really, around. I mean, he even borrow one of my guitars once, just to take it home and sort of put it on and work a way out of, you know, a stance position. And gradually, maybe after about a few months of playing with us, he felt confident enough to start really soloing. He was a consummate stylist in his look and his clothing, and he had a certain sadness about him, which I think was very appealing.
Got a girl called Mamie. She be nice and kind. I don't care what she do. Louise, on my mind. Whoa, Louise. Why don't you hurry home?
Our band was like the typical band of the time that was all based around the lead singer. The lead singer was the front man, so all the attention would go towards Keith. Then after a while, after he'd played in the band for a while, we noticed that there were a crowd building up on his side of the stage, and lots of girls and men as well, you know, that were very interested in what he was doing. So he was doing something or other, but I don't know exactly what.
He had men and women, boys and girls, I guess, at that time. Yes, he had his coterie of women who would faithfully follow us and him, possibly because all our gigs were in London or thereabouts, and they would come to every gig and the all-nighters at the Scene Club. And the adoration was a sort of platonic thing, you know.
What made him good at that time, and I would say that that's my, you know, what moves me personally in music. Yeah, you know, it has to send a shiver down my back, and I have to be really moved by the way somebody plays. And without a doubt, at that time, he could play in such a way that could move one's feelings. And I would say he has that ability. And I mean, when you look at him playing, you can actually see that he's playing from his soul, inner self, pain, in the same way as the people we were trying to emulate.
It's almost like triangulated. I was on my journey, without a doubt, towards, you know, rhythm and blues and blues. And I think the other guys like Keith and Paul Samuel Smith were going in different directions. And I think both of those guys, I don't know that Keith had really made up his mind what he wanted to be, but he was attracted to a lot of different things. I mean, he was attracted to jazz, to folk, and to, you know, superstardom. Paul was like listening to Bob Dylan and Joan Baez in the days when no one knew who they were, and was probably much more into organic music. And those kind of things were conflicting with one another, and a lot of the time we didn't really have any access to express that conflict. It was just like disgruntled. We weren't. I mean, I think we could all tell that we weren't seeing it the same way, but didn't quite know how to bring it back together again. You know.
How many times must I say I love you before you finally understand? Won't you be my poor little woman? I'll try to be your forever man. Try to be your forever man.
Well, I think possibly the Yardbirds was the first time he established an audience, and he realised that an audience were turned on by him. And it wasn't just the playing. You know, again, going back, I almost think it's actually, you know, in his character, it's kind of more important in a way, not so much the playing, which of course is superb, but it's the charisma that's sent out, the vibes, that actually makes him more interesting. What I think about Eric is that he has developed such a devoted following worldwide, which is both men and women. And I think what's interesting, and in retrospect, what I can see from the very early days, he had an attractiveness which I can see would be very appealing to younger women. I think in a way he probably misconstrued the Yardbirds to a degree in what we were, and actually how serious and experimental we wanted to be. Also, you have to remember that he had actually joined a family that, although only in a short term, but had already been formed. So he was slightly the outsider. I mean, I think that it's been quoted that he thought we were rather middle class. Well, actually at the time that is completely untrue. I think what he probably meant was that we had a pretty normal family, and maybe that was part of the puzzle. And anyway, what happened was he decided, I think, that you know, this particular song was very commercial, it was too poppy for him. It didn't. How did it relate to the blues? Also, I mean, I wasn't party to the sort of Stalin-esque goings-on behind the scene, but I felt he didn't feel that he was in control of that music, which he was a great influence earlier in the Yardbirds. I mean, a lot of the songs we did came from him and his musical collection.
He got the nickname Slowhand Clapton, actually, from Hamish Grimes. We were playing really frenetically. He'd really be bashing into his strings, and he'd break a string, and of course he'd take a while to change the string, and this was the joke in Slowhand Clapton.
You know if things don't go to suit you, I think I lose my mind.
was several different schools of thought in the Yardbirds. I saw that there was a way forward without it becoming totally commercial. And I had, we were kind of given this like exam situation by the guy that was managing us. Giorgio said, well, we got this opportunity to make a record, and we need it's a single kind of thing. So you've all got to come up with, it was like everyone come up with an idea. And the closest I could come to it without really compromising our ideals was this Otis Redding song. And what they ended up doing was a Graham Gouldman song, which is a great song for any band, but it wasn't the... I didn't want to be our first record of any status being harnessed or anything that I was involved to that kind of image that quickly.
With the Yardbirds moving towards the pop charts with the single For Your Love, Eric decided to move the other way. He quit the band, but the legend of Clapton was gathering pace.
There was actually another agenda going on, which was that I wasn't a very likable guy. And I wasn't, it was a very nasty piece of work a lot of the time then. I was unreliable, dogmatic, and unsociable a lot of the time. And I think they saw me as being the fly in the ointment, and it was like, once we got rid of Eric, we can get on with this, and become like a really successful group. But sooner or later, I've got to go back home to Ripley, perhaps, and admit that this has all been a mistake and go back to work with my grandfather on the building site.
And then Eric received a call that would both change his life and confirm his image as a loner, a man who had put his music before financial gain, a purist and a musical genius.
And then I got the call from John Mayall, and I thought, this is it. I've met somebody else who has that same view of how it can be.
He was the only guitar player that I'd heard that was on the scene who had really any idea of what it really was all about. I think he was to be regarded pretty much as a nomad, and it was something you put up with, right? As a band leader, it was a little frustrating not to have that reliability that I was used to. But of course, his talents and his playing were worth putting up with, the aggro.
I had an album called Bluesbreakers by John Mayall, and Eric was the lead guitarist. And he played a Freddie King song called Hideaway, which I learned by slowing it down to 16 and learning every lick, and then gradually being able to wind it up to 33 RPM and then playing it with him, every note, note for note. And I could play the whole album like that eventually, so I learned to play lead guitar listening to Eric Clapton.
It was obvious from his playing that he'd absorbed far more than most and had assimilated a multitude of great styles into his own playing.
Working on the sound of the band, trying to get the music right, to go out work, reach their home at night.
With Eric, it's just really been a blues-based thing that has been refined here and there and extended backwards in time and refined around what there is there. And it's an excellent base for explorations, really, and for just doing different things because, well, in fact, you can hear it in, when you get figures who are maybe popular in rock bands who play, but they don't have that basis, and they try and do bluesy things or blues type things. And I remember Eric laughing at, some people's efforts to do that. because I suppose people achieve a sort of facility on instruments, and then so they think that they can therefore play that stuff, and it's not as easy as that.
It's a craft. You know, I don't really respond to this idea that rock and roll should be something that is so spontaneous that as soon as you can play, you can't do it anymore. I think that's nonsense. You know, it is a craft. It's an instrument with a long tradition, 1,000 years of tradition. The more you practice, the better you get. The more choices you have at your fingertips, literally. We must respect that. We must respect learning and craft. And Eric Clapton is someone I respect greatly.
If you think that you can doodle around on a guitar, so why can't you get up and do that? Then just try it and see what sort of an effect that you have. You know, that it's a hard-won thing, and it comes from being in love with it and being obsessive, semi-obsessive, or obsessive to a fairly extensive degree about it. That's how you get to have a touch like that and a sound like that, and because you are your own thing. It's not just derivative. It's not just completely derivative. You know, you end up getting your own sound and your own approach to things, and there are times on stage when I've stood next to him and just been blown away by some of that stuff, because it's great. It's really great blues guitar playing, you know. Nothing less than that.
Eric at that time was, in my mind, totally brilliant. I mean, there were nights when he felt like playing, and he really had it in him. He was coming out with things on the guitar that would make your jaw drop. But you know, he had to be in the mood. He was one of those very up and down things. He never quite knew what you were going to get. But like I say, when he was on form, I mean, there was nothing like it.
I am very conscious of its significance, and even then, I actually must admit that I was resistant about making a record. I think what it was that I've always considered, to a certain extent, that what I do isn't the real thing, you know, and even now I'm haunted by that the real thing is over there somewhere, on the other side of the Atlantic or in a club, and so therefore being put on record has suddenly forced me to stand up and account for the fact that I'm actually in the marketplace with that, and must be and I have to be ready to be compared to the thing I've always wanted to emulate. So suddenly now, and I think especially at that stage in mine, I was still very young. I didn't think I was ready to step into that kind of arena.
The making of the Bluesbreakers album was, for us, just business as usual. We went into the studio and basically recorded what we had been playing on stage. And, you know, at the time we didn't expect it to do anything other than just document what we were up to, what we were doing.
That Bluesbreakers album is now regarded as a groundbreaking record. For the first time, the sensibilities of amplified rock were combined with the sound of the great Chicago bluesmen. It was a virtuoso performance. But even as the Bluesbreakers album was being pressed, Eric was elsewhere, on the move, and restless to escape any sort of pigeonholing. It was symptomatic of the inner conflict between private needs and the public acclaim. Eric just did not want to play the fame game.
All the time that I was with John, I was leaving and coming back. I mean, it never happened in one go. It was like I would go off little jaunts or not show up at gigs too. You know, it was quite normal for me to forget maybe, or just not be bothered, or want to do something else. I mean, it's hard for me now to imagine the kind of guy I was that would do that to somebody. But I think at the time, you know, I was with John and I wasn't with John. There was part of me that was saying, no, this is okay, but it's not okay. That I was already thinking of moving on. So I think what I would probably be doing would be to John, just to let him know, was that every now and then I sabotage the whole thing, so that he know he couldn't count on me and that I actually was on my passing through. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not staying here. I suppose I thought somewhere in the back of my mind that I was going to be ready perhaps when I was about 40 to make a record. You know, that up until then I was going to be a student of trying to get it right. You know, there was going to be another 10 or 15 or 20 years of getting it right before I would ever have to stand up and account for what I had achieved. And yet here I was, like 20 years old, and shoved in. I mean, I remember being shoved in the studio, although I'm sure I was very happy to be there, with Muddy Waters and Otis Spann when I was 19 years old. And these were already, men's men. And I was a kid, with a guitar. And I felt terrified. Beyond belief. I had no idea of how to conduct myself whatsoever. I had no idea. And I don't know whether I did well or not. It was almost like I blanked it out of my memory. I was so frightened. And these guys were in their suits, and there were men in their 40s who'd achieved. They were the kings, and in a way, it just didn't seem right to me. It still doesn't seem right to me.
By the time the classic Bluesbreakers album was issued, Eric had already left the band. His diffidence is probably best shown in the way he's pictured on the sleeve, reading the comic The Beano. But despite his attitude, the album spawned London's most famous rock graffiti all over the capital. Eric was hailed as the master. His next band proved the point.
In a white room with black curtains by the station.
In 1967, Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton formed the first and mightiest supergroup of the 60s. Called Cream, they changed the face of rock music forever.
Silver horses ran down the leaves in her dark eyes. Dawnlight smile on you leaving my contentment.
I never didn't see the point in recreating a kind of Chicago blues band, that's. And I remember discussions with him, and saying, "Well, no, I want to take it somewhere else," which is really presumptuous, very daring and kind of arrogant and everything. But I was young.
For the first time, Eric was playing alongside his musical equals. The results were electric.
I had met my match with both of them. Up until then, I'd really been able to kind of manipulate and dominate situations, musically speaking. Around these guys, I felt like a younger brother, and I was very aware of the dynamic being out of my control. That I really, and that interested me, no doubt about it. I thought here was something where I could almost step into the background. It was all going on all the time between Jack and Ginger. There was a lot of energy, either aggressive and loving too. They were very, very, they were active human beings and very big in their emotions and their ambitions and their creative abilities. They were very, very big people, bigger than anyone I'd met until that point.
Cream became one of the biggest bands in the world. Their music crossed over between the pop charts and the growing underground scene, and each album they produced outsold the last.
We were conscious of the fact that we were held in awe, even amongst like the music press here, which, you know, in those days was quite an achievement. You know, when we did the first gig, we didn't even have a full repertoire. We played at some jazz festival, Reading Jazz Festival, I think, with about 5 songs, which was what we had. And people were blown away. And we were very conscious of what we had. Based on a commercial foundation. It was undescribable. It wasn't jazz, it wasn't blues, it wasn't rock and roll, and it definitely wasn't pop music. So it was something that a grown-up person could listen to, and yet it had a lot of other things too that were quite poppy, you know. and it was very exciting.
At the time, he was known as the greatest guitarist in the world. You know, I mean, this is hyperbole that Eric wanted to live down for a long time, you know, because it was embarrassing. But he was certainly up there. But Eric always identified his sources. He never hid away from the fact he didn't say, well, I invented this stuff. You know, he was steeped in a knowledge of the blues and had done his apprenticeship, done that. He's a modest man, but also an extraordinary musician, and he's a craftsman. You know, he's a guy who works at his craft, who studies and works hard and gets better as he gets older. That's a lesson for all of us.
suppose a lot of we're responsible for a lot of sort of dodgy heavy metal bands, really. And for that I apologise. I think probably we took the pop music into areas that it hadn't been before, and you were able to do things, you get away with things that, things crossed over. But that's a thing that's always happening anyway. I don't see those years as really any different to now.
And with the Cream, Jack and Ginger, I knew real well. I knew them as well as I knew Eric, if not better. For a while. And but Eric's a searcher. That's what I think, and he doesn't stop searching. Sometimes it takes him into some morose areas, which I think, they cheer up. Bloody millionaire guitar player. You should be miserable.
I think Ginger had problems with success. I had problems with success, but Ginger really had them, and Ginger would try to make, whenever we were about to sort of have this great success, he would try to make it not happen, so that it wouldn't have happened yet, But I don't think Eric had any real problems with that. I'm sure he always knew he was going to be successful, and I'm sure he was very ambitious for a certain kind of success, which he has more than achieved. And I don't think he ever had a problem with it.
We had almost like invented our own language, so that when we were touring around England, the promoters would come and talk to us, or someone would, ordinary people would come up to us, and we would compose a barrier. We would talk amongst ourselves in a way that these guys couldn't understand. I mean, it was almost, I've seen it with the Beatles too. I saw that when they were all alive and working together. They had this same kind of like a human fortress aspect that was very powerful and very impenetrable and scary and exciting to be around.
What we were doing up until that point was we were doing little short versions of our songs, 3, 4, 5 minute things, which was nice. But then everybody was so out of it, the Fillmore, were all lying on the floor going, just play. So we did. We just sort of did these. And then that became the albatross, as it were, which kind of broke the camel's back. That's a good one. Because we always had to play these really long solos. It was kind of like the Who had to destroy the drum set every night. We had to play really long solos every night.
Cream combined psychedelia with power rock. The mix came together in the best-selling album, Disraeli Gears. It became one of the style icons of the Summer of Love in '67.
As far as I remember, we were driving to a gig and just talking, and the fact that Ginger was a racing cyclist before he became a drummer. And the roadie said, oh, when you had that racing bike, did you have Disraeli gears? Something like that. It's just instead of derailleur gears. That was the album title.
Disraeli Gears remains one of the classic, groundbreaking psychedelic albums of the 60s. And amazingly, it was recorded in New York City in only 3 days.
Everything about the album was revealing. Here are all of these new techniques, these new traditions. It was an absolutely bizarre experience to record, and I had no guideline. So, caution to the wind. If they're crazy, I'll be crazier. And so here we go.
You're all I want to know. I feel free. I feel free. I feel free. I can walk down the street, there's no one there.
Feel to it, and it spawned countless bands, countless guitar players, brought it to a world of people who had never heard of Robert Johnson or Willie Dixon or Albert King. And yeah, it was a major boost.
Eric scared everybody, you know, but that's what you have to do. You have to do that. It's like being kind of like being a gunslinger. And yeah, you can play faster, I can play louder, I can play more, I can play less, I can play more of less and less of more and bigger and wider and thinner. So that's what you do. Well, we just scared everybody, I'm sure.
The late 60s became the era of the guitar hero, and Eric was top of the pile. He became the guy to aim for. Others tried to play longer and faster, but it was a competition that Eric did not see in those terms. It was a throwback to the movies of his youth that gave him a cultural reference point.
It's almost like a samurai thing. When it's very interesting that I was always very interested in samurai movies. The great ones are the ones who kind of play a defensive role. The great samurais are the ones that don't go charging in. They wait and they wait, and they usually give their opponent the first shot at it, you know what I mean? And it's much the same way in my knowledge of our culture, the guitar players, is that the great ones never appear to go into combat, you know. They always like give up the stage to whoever's coming on, you know, and take a back seat, and in a way win by default.
At the peak of Cream's success, Eric was saddled not only by the graffiti that labeled him as God, but also by common consent, he was the world's greatest guitarist. It was quite a cross to bear.
A lot of the things that people rave about, I don't get at all. I mean, like the live version of Crossroads, which is supposed to be the peak of my career, I think is awful. My enjoyment of that experience is in the recollection of the relationship, the events that took place, and the live music we made, and a lot of that was on dope, you know, and so it may have felt better than it sounded. It probably did. It was probably awful to listen to, but was great to play.
Cream were only together for 2.5 years, but their influence is still around today, rather unlike Eric's next project. Blind Faith made one rather controversial album, controversial for its sleeve rather than its content, and then faded from the firmament. On the group's US tour, Eric took to traveling on the support act Delaney and Bonnie's tour bus, rather than with Stevie Winwood, Ginger Baker and Rick Gretsch. At the tour end, everyone knew Blind Faith, We're No More. The result, though, was one of rock's greatest albums. As the 60s drew to a close, Eric Clapton was left without a band. He created some of the most memorable music of the decade, like the song Badge he wrote with George Harrison. Not to mention providing the solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps off the Beatles' White Album. But with Blind Faith and Cream both in the past, Eric looked closer to home for inspiration. His friend George Harrison had written Here Comes the Sun at the bottom of Eric's garden. Now George's wife Patty became Eric's most famous inspiration. On the 23rd of August in 1970, Eric flew to Miami with musicians from Delaney and Bonnie's band. There he was introduced to another guitar legend. With typical modesty, Eric became Derek, and a new band was born. Derek and the Dominos recorded just one studio album together, but it was a great one.
That night, the whole Allman Brothers band and Derek and the Dominos went back to the studio, and here are Eric and Dwayne playing licks. I mean, to hear two strangers that are not strangers, it's like they've been lifelong friends, feeding each other. And that was the beginning of Layla.
Well, we've been working and living together for about a year as the Dominos back in England, here in England, living down in the country and touring and doing clubs, and we were writing as we went along, but it hadn't really, we hadn't really put together a concept for this thing at all. I mean, it was going to be perhaps one album, but then when Dwayne came into the mix, it was just a question of like opening every door we could and going in every room, trying every piece of material that I could think of from my past and his past, and then it was a double album. But I think the group, the Dominos, were already pretty well. I mean, I'd known them and played with them as Delaney and Bonnie, and then when Delaney and left and everything, we knew one another pretty well.
The combination of Duane Allman and Eric Clapton produced a guitar classic.
The A minor, da-da-da-dee-doo-doo-da, off the E to the G to the A. I think it was played as a lick inside one of the portions. And all of a sudden they said, put that up front. Da-da-da-dee-doo-doo-da.
Well, to begin with, it didn't do very well. It was actually quite a long time before it became a popular record. I think it was out for a long time before it took off. Because I think it was anonymous, and then people didn't really know anything about it. And we didn't I didn't promote it, I've never really wanted, that was a classic example of my philosophy about record promotion, is not call it somebody else and don't do anything. Because then if it's good, it will sell on its own merit. I think the greatest thing now that I recognise from it is that how lucky I was to be around those kind of musicians, especially like Jim Gordon, Carl Radle. Every one of them, Bobby Whitlock, Duane Allman. That was an incredible. If I'm proud of anything, I'm proud of the fact that I was enough of a musician for them to want to work with me.
What will you do when you're lonely? No one waiting by your side. You've been running high much too long. You know it's just your foolish mind. Hey, love, got me on my knees.
The album Layla is rumoured to have been recorded in a narcotic haze. The next part of Eric's life wavered dramatically between serious bouts of superstardom and complete seclusion. For nearly 2 years, Eric was in a drug-induced hinterland. Retiring at first to his house near Ewhurst, he even spent the summer as a farm labourer in Wales as he grappled with his much publicised personal problems. The death of Jimi Hendrix, Eric's grandfather, Duane Allman, and others near and dear to him, coupled with his torment over Patty, fueled his addiction.
Drugs caused in me like a kind of stupor, which, especially the major drugs, just turned me into like a zombie, and I couldn't do much harm to myself just sitting in front of the TV on a 24-hour basis. I hadn't ever done it intravenously, so there was not the great danger of overdosing that you get with a needle, for instance. But alcohol I was driving drunk a lot of the time, and I was doing things drunk aggressively with other human beings that took me into a lot of life-threatening situations that I wish I didn't need to do. And so for me, alcohol was and is far more threatening.
I used to handle all kinds of stuff for him. Well, I would always have to have a packet of cigarettes in my pocket, a small pair of nail clippers, a bottle of Courvoisier, a bottle of 7-Up or Sprite, a glass or two. I had a little box which I used to carry, which had all that in, with the initials WBA on it, for West Bromwich Albion. Eric was a big fan.
Brandy, yeah, brandy. It's always large brandies. Large brandy lemonade. Didn't drink anything else. Odd beer, but that was it. Large brandies. And he was getting to 3 bottles a day, and we knew that.
My main responsibility was to ensure that Eric got on stage sober.
My evaluation of my achievements was very different to everybody else's. I felt that I hadn't done anything of any great value, and yet and that people out there, especially around that stuff with Cream, were saying all kinds of things, and I thought, well, they've missed the point. And especially on top of that, being told that I was this sort of legend, and I had no way of carrying that. I had no means.
I think Eric's always searching for himself, which I think is a great thing. Hence the changes in persona and look, and there's kind of an outward sign of something that's still, but hey, that's what the whole thing is about, searching.
In 1973, The Who's Pete Townshend hauled Eric out of semi-retirement. The following year, he was back in Miami with Tom Dowd, recording the album that would mark the transition to global solo recording star. The album was named after the place where he stayed, 461 Ocean Boulevard.
I was, I suppose, forced to consider myself as a solo artist, and it had been something that was probably waiting to occur. Or, you know, it was either I was gonna have to really consciously make up my mind that I was going to be in a band as just a sideman for somebody, or I was going to take the bull by the horns and be Eric Clapton, the solo artist. And it was like 3 years before I came back to do 461 Ocean Boulevard. And the net result was that there was a great deal of kind of subconscious meditation went on during that time, and the album itself that came from that 461 was very powerful as a result.
In the band that played the tracks from that album on the road was Marcy Levy.
He just blew me away. He was so passionate. You know, the thing about Eric that was always great is, whereas there were all these people playing 10 million notes and showing off, Eric would play this one note and it would just make you want to cry. It would just bring you to your knees. And that happened every night, you know, and it wasn't always the same every night. It was something different, you know. It was just amazing how he could do that.
Even though the 70s and 80s were decades fueled by booze, it was a problem that Eric's fans were largely unaware of. In fact, the legend of Clapton grew. Now he was a frontman as well as a unique instrumental talent.
The other thing about Eric that I've always said, he's one of my favorite singers. To me, he's a kind of like a white Ray Charles in a way.
But in 1991, his grief and suffering became horribly public. His 6-year-old son, Connor, fell to his death from his New York apartment as Eric was making his way across town for a visit. Eric's grief became the centerpiece for the outpouring that was Tears in Heaven. It brought a whole new generation of fans to the man who is now grappling with all his demons. His personification of "you've got to have the blues to play the blues" took on a new meaning, and the stripped-down, honest and pure approach Eric now took to his life and his music was totally in tune with his audience. And once again, he became one of the world's most successful performers.
It all adds up to what we have as Eric Clapton, you know. His entire life is his work, and it comes through his work, and he's had some terrible tragedies in his life. But it's been fortunate to have a mode of expression like music where that can be processed and healed again.
I think time has probably been the most important thing for Eric. Like, time is for anybody who's a musician. Time teaches you, you know, more about life. You go through all kinds of different situations, and only through the experience of life does one, you know, learn from those situations.
It's what he's gone through personally that's gotten him to where he is, and because he's willing to express that through his music and be vulnerable and put himself out there. You know, that's why he is there, because he's experienced it and he shares it.
Tears in Heaven and the Unplugged session were a huge commercial and artistic success. Eric walked away with a record haul of Grammys. After his initial soundtrack work with Michael Kamen, Clapton now became Hollywood's favorite composer, his soundtracks adorning Phenomenon, Lethal Weapon, and The Color of Money.
back and reach the stars. Pull one down for you, shining on my heart, so you could see the truth. And this love I have inside is everything it seems. But for now I find it's only in my dreams that I can change the world. I will be the sunlight in your universe. You would think my love was really something good. Baby, if I could change the world. I hate to say it, I hate to say it, but it's probably me. I need people in my life like Eric Clapton to be ahead of me, and to see how they jump. That's the legacy. He's not pretending he's 17. He's not tying himself into latex trousers or wearing a wig or a corset. He is himself.
I think Eric's style, to me, I like the fact that he plays really clean, really simple, uncluttered. It's like having a conversation with somebody. If you listen to a solo in Eric's style, it's what I like about guitar players who have meaning with what comes out of what they play, you know. There's a story behind it. It's not just a bunch of notes garbled together, you know, as a show-off kind of thing or any kind of antic or anything like that. It's musical, very melodic, and it speaks to you.
You ask yourself, who'd watch for me? My only friend, who could it be? It's hard to say it, I hate to say it, but it's probably me.
Well, I think it's without equal. You know, any time he plays anything, regardless of whether it's a blues piece or a pop piece or whatever, you know, he's got his unmistakable own stamp on it, and I've always followed everything he does with great interest and enjoyment.
Eric's a classic electric blues guitar player, based, you know, on the styles of Buddy Guy and Freddie King and people like that. And that's where it all comes from. And of course, going back their styles and that kind of music goes back to country blues too. And Eric, of course, is very keen on that as well, that whole side of things.
Ask yourself, who'd watch for me? A solitary voice to speak out and set me free. I hate to say it, I hate to say it, but it's probably me.
I think what's cool about Eric is I don't think that he knows how good he is. And that's cool. I don't think any player should have this idea that they're, you know, leagues above anybody, and there should be some humility behind it, and he has that. And when you play, you just play for the song. I mean, it's great to stand up on stage with Eric, and he's gonna play the song. He's not gonna do anything else. He's gonna play the song. When he comes in to sit in with us or anybody else, he comes up to play the song. And that's great. It makes the band look good, it makes himself look good, the whole thing sounds good.
When the world's gone crazy and it makes no sense, there's only one voice that comes to your defense. The jury's out and your eyes search the room, and one friendly face is all you need to see. And if there's one guy, just one guy.
The 90s were also to be the decade when Eric cleaned up his private life. He stopped the intake of drugs and drink and set up Crossroads, a clinic in Antigua to help both local and international casualties of addiction. He sold his beloved guitars to fund the center.
It was painful drawing up the list more than anything, because deciding what, because I kept quite a lot, and looking at what I had was a shock. I had no idea. I felt quite guilty that I'd amassed that many guitars, and so part of it was like a very, very good purging experience, that I really thought it was very kind of greedy to have all of them, needed to move them, you know. But then, you know, each time I tick one, I thought, oh, no. And then I thought, well, you've got to. And one thing I know about this is that this is like I have a responsibility to share that, you know, otherwise I will probably slip back into my old ways, because as I share this as a human being, I get to recognize what a great gift I have, and that, you know, every day is like a bonus, really. I mean, I'd have no right to be here, considering the amount of situations that I put myself in. I should be really in the ground. But I've set a date, which will be at the end of 2002, when I will not work. And it's kind of like I've reached an age where that could be a call to retirement. I don't think it will be, but it is it is that thing that I'm talking about. We're actually saying, having the guts to say, no, we won't do anything now for maybe a year or a couple of years, and then see what happens on the other side of that.
It seems like Eric has now gone full circle in a way. He's a teacher nowadays, a counselor. He helps other people to deal with their addictions. It shows that he's traveled far in his life, but one thing has remained constant: his music and his dedication to the blues.
Well, I know he was a genius when I heard him in John Mayall Blues Band. He's a dedicated blues man. I don't know him to play anything else but the blues. When he played rock, it's the rock blues. He can do it all, but it's all the blues. And he loved it.
I think he have dedicated himself to what he loved. He have dedicated his whole life to his music, and when you do that, you be the best that you can, and he is the best that you can get.
It's not a life of milk and honey, this stuff, you know what I mean? On the surface, from outside, I can understand everybody, you know, millionaire rock star, but the fact is that Eric's still got to get to the crossroads. So do I, you know, because there's not just one. There are several crossroads. Yeah, and if you think there's just one, well, look out, pal.
It's late in the evening. She's wondering what clothes to wear. She'll put on her makeup and brushes her long blonde hair.
Eric's just the best, no question. I was very, very fortunate to have played with him and to have, been influenced by him. He's also a great teacher, which people probably don't mention a lot. he taught me a lot of things about myself and about music that I will never forget or never. I'm so thankful for that.
Well, he's one of these people who immediately picks up the guitar, plays the first note, and there's that very, very clear signature. You know, it's like hearing Stevie Wonder play the harmonica, or Stevie Wonder play the Hammond organ. It's immediately recognizable. It just comes through. Oh, that's Eric. Oh, that's Stevie. And so you're playing with a legend. You're playing with a real human being, but also you're playing with a legend, and I'm never blasé about that. It always thrills me.
He's one of the best blues guitarists that there is, I think. Well, one of the reasons I love standing on stage with him, I used to enjoy going down there and getting up and playing, apart from the fact that there was just no pressure because you're on the side, and you're just playing, is just to listen to the song, listen to his voice. It always seemed to me to have that soul in, about not just about his playing, but it's in his singing too, which people tend to forget. He's a really good singer.
Something I can't be proud of. Had enough bad love. No more bad
Eric will definitely be a major influence for basically from now on. As far as guitar players are concerned, when you mention guitar, Eric's name always comes up. Always comes up, and that's a great thing.
I need something I can't be proud of. Had enough bad love.
I respond in a very, very instinctive way to something that's new and powerful, and I don't really often know quite what it is that causes that. I mean, I am very, very stimulated by design of any kind, even musical design and visual design. It's so good songwriting, great playing, great singing, great drawing, great designing, hits the same point in me. And if I get excited, that's the first thing that happens. And then I kind of got to sit down and figure out why, usually. I mean, I have to try and do a bit of analysis to understand what it is about the form of that thing that is causing that effect, and that's the kind of academic side of it, I guess. But they're all, to me, part of the same picture. And it's usually to do with purity and tradition,
He's a very integrated person now, I feel. There's a edge of melancholy about the man and a seriousness about the man, but that really is a pillar of strength, you know, and I respect him deeply. He's a very serious man.
One thing that I like about Eric is he appreciates what he has learned from, you know, the different musics that he's listened to, blues. When we did the nights at Albert Hall, you know, about 90 and I guess it was 91 maybe that year, those years, bringing people like Johnny Johnson, Albert Collins, and Buddy Guy, and you know, the blues people to, you know, having those different nights, you know, that he had with all the different music. That's great. That's a great thing to do. That brings, you know, that shows respect to the people who he's learned from and has respect for, and you know, Eric does things like that to come out to Austin to do the tribute for Stevie Ray Vaughan, I thought was an excellent thing that he's done, and you know, he's just a very passionate and kind-hearted soul.
And then she'll ask me, do you feel alright? And I'll say yes, I feel wonderful tonight. You just don't realize how much.
With anything that I set about to do, there's the idea, which is kind of perfect, the seed of the idea, which is perfect, and then when you make it into reality, it becomes human and it becomes fallible and it becomes not quite right, and then the rest of the journey is about trying to get it to fit the way it did in my head, to try and make that as close as what I believe God would want me to do. As I get older, I take much more time deliberating over any one of these crossroads things, but I don't for a minute imagine that they'll ever go away, and I think that's part of the journey for as long as I shall be alive.